I've only learned to live on their fear, their pain.
Zeus, our brother speaks the truth. Hear him.
Hi there, everyone. Well, welcome to episode lucky number 7. So, last week we went over the poem by the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, who was around the same time as Homer, and had works that were just as well regarded and influential as the Iliad and the Odyssey, but was a little bit more informational, right? There's definitely stories told all throughout Theogony, but the point of them is more directly to educate the reader / listener on the origins of the universe and the many, many, many different children who were born / created to fill up our universe with all of the natural elements and phenomenon that go on. And the Iliad and the Odyssey definitely does have a couple of life lessons woven into it as well, sort of like a fable style, which is the route that most stories, myths, and legends tend to follow. So it has more of subtler teaching moments sprinkled in throughout, kind of demonstrating human morals or internal struggles. But Hesiod's approach to educating through his work is a lot more direct. He lays out the facts, we'll say, who was first, what happened, and how it happened when it comes to the creation of the gods. So the entire poem is just over 1,000 lines, and it draws out the whole timeline of events from the cosmic void of nothingness, chaos, all the way up to the Titanomachy, and then of course to the presence of the Olympians, and then the full-on introduction of mortal men. So the Olympians, of course, are the main 12 to 14 gods that live atop Mount Olympus, which is the name of 2 actual peaks in ancient Greece, but the ones that the gods actually lived on was the one in Thessaly. And it's actually not only the tallest mountain in Greece, but also one of the highest peaks in all of Europe. So I guess they kind of knew what they were talking about when they made it the home of the gods. And I know that the whole big thing is there's 12 Olympians, but I usually include the gods like Hestia and Hades into the little Olympic gang. So I usually go 14. And some people even add in other deities like Persephone to the Olympians, but the thing is that the main 12 are the active gods who live on Mount Olympus. And that's kind of where the cutoff comes in. So Hades, obviously, as the king of the Underworld, does not have a house on Mount Olympus. So that's how he gets kicked off the team. Then poor sweet Hestia, the slightly mentioned goddess of the hearth and older sister of Zeus, actually gave up her seat at the Olympic table to make room for the god of wine, vegetation, ritual madness, and a bunch of other wild stuff, Dionysus, when he shows up. And so that's why she's often forgotten and left out too. But enough of all that, because today is about the big 3, the 3 brothers that have dominion over the sky, sea, and the underworld. So first off is the big man himself, the Almighty Zeus, king of the gods and ruler of the sky, weather, law and order, destiny and fate, and kingship. His mighty name in Greek translates out to pretty much mean sky father, but it's also sort of a little open to interpretation. And of course, all of the gods have Roman names, oddly enough, except Apollo, who gets to keep his Greek identity. But the Romans called him Jupiter. And it makes sense as to why the planet's named after him. It's the biggest planet, so obviously it must be the most important, right? There are depictions of him everywhere, and most of them usually include the same core characteristics. He's usually fully clothed, he wears a wreath of olive leaves, curly beard, old man face with ripped abs, and he always has his trusty lightning bolt in hand. So Zeus is the most popular of the gods and is present in almost every single myth, so there is a lot to say about him. Over time, he managed to accumulate 7 wives, many of whom were his sisters, but once again, there was not many choices in the very beginning. Eventually, the dating pool did open up, and he was able to have affairs with tons of other women. The number's actually something like 50. Some were mortals, some were goddesses, and most of them were seduced by him in his non-godly form. One lady is impregnated by him when he presents himself as a flow of golden rain. Another one, he was a swan, and another one, he was a bull. But those two animal ones, I guess, are not as weird as the golden rain thing. There was one time he actually even disguised himself as another woman's husband, Amphitryon. And if the name sounds familiar, well, it is, because it's Hercules' dad. So the god shapeshifted into Alcmene's husband while he was out actually avenging her brother's death. Zeus had actually been already turned down by her prior to him pretending to be her husband, so that adds a little extra layer of ick here. After their union, she thinks she just slept with her husband, until the next day when he actually comes home and the two of them are totally confused about what just happened. She then, of course, gets pregnant and gives birth to twins, one who is the son of Zeus, and the other one is fathered by her actual husband. And of course, the Zeus baby is the mighty Hercules. But anyways, his last wife, Hera, is the one that is married to him during a lot of these shenanigans, and usually doesn't put up with them. Well, I mean, actually she does kind of put up with them, but then she goes and does something like to get back at him for those little extramarital relations. Aside from the floozy side of the king of the gods, he was also like the most powerful of them all and the one who really laid down the law when it came to people doing terrible things, like eating their children, stealing fire and giving it to mankind, or like trying to break into Olympus or something. And also like considering that he was the one to ultimately overthrow his father and then like free his siblings from their stomach prison, I do agree that he definitely was destined to be like the ruler of Olympus. So next up is brother number 2. This is Poseidon, the ruler of the sea, earthquakes, floods, and horses. Obviously, the thing that always distinguishes him from the rest is the giant 3-pronged trident, which was a pointy spear that was often used by fishermen. He is depicted as a middle-ish aged man who is also ripped, is either fully clothed in a trident or just straight up nude with a cloak draped over his arms. And even though he has dominion over all of the seas, oceans, and just water, his main base is said to be the Aegean Sea. And like, you can't blame him for that. And also, the god of the sea was known to maybe have a little bit of a quick temper, which is shown in a couple of his overreactions, like in Troy and Athens, and then like the whole Odysseus thing. So Poseidon, like his younger brother, is also known to be a ladies' man, and got the reputation for consistently seducing mortal women and nymphs. And in this group, of course, is poor Medusa. But he also had a wife, Aphrodite, and she is his other half, being the young woman who initially turned down the god, but then agreed to marry him after he transformed into a dolphin and managed to convince her to marry him. A relationship built on deceit. That's totally going to work out. But the two of them did still have a lot of kids together, some of who were Proteus and Triton, minor gods of the salty water. And of course, through his affairs and his own extramarital activities, he had a bunch of other kids that were mortals or like not human children that got added into his family tree. Poseidon is also pretty relevant in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. He, of course, helped Troy build their famous Trojan Wall and then got pissed at them after the king refused to hold up his end of the deal. So that's why he ended up siding with the Greeks during that super long war. And do you know what his sacred plant is? Well, there's 2 that are usually associated with the god, but one of them is celery. And like, I don't know why, but that's funny, right? The celery is technically 95% water, so it totally does make sense, but it's just funny to think that the headpiece that he's usually seen wearing is a crown of celery. The name Poseidon translates out to roughly mean husband of the earth or lord of the earth. And of course, he also has his Romanized name as well, which is Neptune. And that name is then, of course, gifted to the 8th and the bluest planet in our solar system. And funny enough, he gets like 0.01 seconds of airtime in Disney's Hercules. And that's something I never actually like took into consideration until I started working on like this episode. The only time we even see the god is like as a background character when they pan over the crowd at Achilles' little Olympic welcome party. Narcissus literally gets more airtime than him. He's just some fish guy in the clouds. But like, obviously, there's a bunch of little oddities like that in that movie. But we still love it. Anyways, so yeah, Poseidon is considered the second best brother. And I suppose it is because he is still an Olympian and is like not in charge of dead people. So I guess having control over the sea and the sky does kind of sound better. But similar to both his brothers, even though he's the ruler of the sea, he's definitely not the only kid in the pool. So like before, as we went through like all of the primordials, one of Gaia's very first children is Pontus, and he is meant to be sort of the personification of the sea itself. Even though he's like given a human-ish body at times, he's still meant to be the sea, the Mediterranean Sea actually. But of course, after the whole issue with like the Titans and the war between them and the Olympians, the old guys like Pontus and the rest of them kind of get pushed out of the light to make room for the hot new gods. And because the gods kind of operate on the fairy type system, like if they're not given enough attention or worship, they sort of lose their powers. So that also made it pretty easy for Poseidon to be able to claim dominion of the sea after they overthrew their cannibalistic father earlier on. Even aside from like Pontus himself, there's a ton of other sea deities, many of whom are primordials that hold like minor roles in the Great Blue Sea, like the old men of the sea, Phorcys, and all of the sea monsters that were hanging out in there. When these younger gods began to take over the cosmic rule of the world during the Titanomachy, it is sometimes said that the brothers were given gifts from the Hecatonchires and the Cyclopses as a token of gratitude for freeing them from their imprisonment. During this exchange, their 6 uncles crafted a magical triton to be gifted to the sea god. So that's how he got that. And again, this is a little bit off topic, but have you guys ever seen the Poseidon movie? It came out in, I think, 2005 or 2006. And I think it was like a situation sort of like Pan's Labyrinth where I was like, oh my gods, Greek mythology name. I need to watch it. So my parents and I watched it, and like, I'll admit, I'm not a strong swimmer and I pretty much could not swim at all when I was a kid. And like my fear of water was 1,000% increased after watching this massive cruise ship just like get swallowed up whole by some rogue tidal wave in the middle of the ocean. Definitely not my thing. I will never set foot on a cruise ship, and this movie played a pretty big role in that definitive decision. But getting back to the gods. Okay, so we will call it out now and make it known right off the bat. Hades is not the god of death. He doesn't do any of the killing. All he does is rule over the people after they die. He is the king of the underworld and the god of the dead, aka dead souls, not dying itself. But he's also the god of riches. Usually he's painted out to be the most regal of the siblings. And of course he has his dark hair and a dark beard to match, a bident, which is a 2-pronged spear versus the 3-pronged trident that Poseidon carries, a cap of invisibility, and a key that is supposed to represent his control over the gates of the underworld. But because he was so feared, he actually doesn't have a whole bunch of paintings or statues or mosaics devoted to him either. Hades definitely gets the shaft here, but I mean, they're all like morally gray in a majority of their existence, but Hades is the one who gets a little mischaracterized as like the extinguisher of mankind. So he's thought to be like the bad guy of the gods, which is also odd because like there are a few gods of death that are all responsible for the many different ways that humans die. Like Thanatos, he's like the main deity of death, being like the personification of death and all. But he actually is thought to be of like a kinder and sweeter god. This is a comparison to his siblings, who are the personification of things like murder and cruel death. But he is the twin brother of Hypnos, right? Who is the god of sleep. So I mean, that alone kind of paints death as something that's just like falling asleep and not waking up, which I think is like a pretty soft way to look at it. But anyways, so Hades is usually painted out to be bitter about having to rule over the underworld because, I mean, it is kind of like a gloomy place. But I mean, he was in charge of taking care of people's souls after they died and ensuring that they were given proper burial rites, which was like a super big deal in ancient Greek society. But even ruling over a kingdom full of souls and commanding many other gods and creatures, life did get a little lonely for him. So considering that most prospecting ladies might not have been interested in the idea of a little life in the underworld surrounded by the dead, Hades did the most rational thing and asked his brother to give him one of his daughters that he had fallen in love with after watching her frolic around the garden, probably somewhere in Sicily. So Zeus went, "Okay, yeah, sounds like a really reasonable request. Let me get back to you." And then he just went ahead and said, "Yeah, you can have her," and just offered up one of the daughters that he had with one of his other sisters, Demeter. And the daughter, of course, was Persephone. And she was like not only his to give away though, right? Like she has a mom and it's his sister, so he probably knows how she's going to react to it, right? Yeah, he does. He knows that Demeter is not going to be down with this little plan of theirs, and he also knows that Persephone is not going to go for it either. So Zeus suggested that he do a little plan that involved the abduction of her. So Hades watched her as she picked flowers in the wild and drifted away from her group of friends. And when she was just far enough away, just out of sight, Hades split the earth open and essentially she fell into the underworld. And then the earth was sealed shut and she was stuck down there. Once Demeter realized that her daughter was missing, she got super upset and angry as she searched for her. In her rage, she ravaged the earth, causing drought and famine. And just like overall, she was too consumed with worry about her daughter that she neglected the earth. So no crops were able to grow, and mankind was like kind of dying off. At first, she looked for about 9 days, asking anybody who crossed her path if she knew where Persephone was. And it's like assumed that everybody was like too afraid to rat out Hades and actually tell Demeter what happened to her daughter. So Helios, the god of the sun, was the only one who, when questioned, actually told her where Persephone was. But then he goes on to like explain that, oh, Hades is actually a good guy and they would make a great couple together. And like, don't freak out that she got kidnapped, okay? But then, so after he tells her that, Demeter takes Helios' chariot and then rides off to another city disguised as an old lady and gets a job for a queen to take her mind off her missing daughter. And then, like, during that time, the earth goes straight to hell and like all the humans are dropping like flies because they have no food and no way to sustain themselves. So now Zeus had to get re-involved and try and settle this thing out. So he offers a couple of gifts to his sister/ex-wife, and obviously she's not going to accept something like her cushy seat on Mount Olympus over her own daughter, right? So none of them work. Then finally, Zeus is like, okay, well, this has to stop. So he sends a message with Hermes down to tell Hades that this can't keep going on because like the mortals that worship all of them are suffering, and like what are they supposed to do if they don't have anyone to worship them, right? But Hades, being a little trickster now, agrees to give Persephone back and stop holding her against her will in the underworld. But who would have known that Hades actually tricked her into eating a couple of pomegranate seeds? And this turns out to be like a whole big thing, right? He sets up his chariot and releases Persephone back onto Earth. So now she can be with her mother. But like somehow during their reconnection, Demeter sensed that there was something up. And because Persephone had eaten the pomegranate in the underworld, offered to her by Hades, it meant that now he had some claim over her. It sounds super weird, and it is a weird rationale, but because for some reason in mythology, if you ate the fruit of your captor, it meant that you would have to return to them. I guess it's in some way like you accepted food from them, so like you obviously want to be with them. I don't know. It's a really odd plot point for me, if I'm being totally honest. But anyways, because of this little snack she had in the underworld, she was now obligated to spend time down there. And in a very fair way, they split it right down the middle. 6 months on Earth with mom, and 6 months in the underworld, ruling alongside Hades as his queen. And even though at first she was not cool with being kidnapped, eventually Stockholm Syndrome kicked in and she ended up falling in love with him. And now they're like perceived to be this happy couple by some people. But it's honestly odd that their relationship is propped up, like because of how it started. But apparently Hades did end up treating her very well. So maybe she just perceived it as some very enthusiastic type of courting. So this is the myth that is used to lay out the harvest season for Earth. During the months that Persephone is on Earth, everything is all good and Demeter is happy and flourishing and working her butt off to harvest the crops. But then during the 6 months when she's in the underworld, Demeter enters like a period of depression, and that's when we experience winter and nothing grows. So there you have it. Winter is sad for a reason. And so even though this story is like one of his like main stories, he wasn't necessarily like an evil god. I mean, like, I guess you can interpret some of what he did as being sort of sweet. And I mean, even though not a lot of people were eager to cross his path, even though they were dying to meet him, but pretty much people feared him, but also respected his unwavering sternness. So he was commonly found to be the idol of many cults. But don't worry, it's not just the odd fringe gods that got cult followings. Everybody gets a cult. Zeus was worshipped by a ton of cults, but you also can't really stop people from latching on to you when you're the king of the gods. And even Poseidon was sometimes called the Earth Shaker by his cult followers, and they apparently hosted some major parties. But yeah, so that's the big three. Obviously, as time goes on, we'll get to some more myths and legends that revolve around these guys. They are mentioned a lot in mythology. And yeah, that's because they are the big three, right? So yeah, but Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades all kind of have their own situations around their professional and personal lives. But even though they seem similar, they're all presented to have pretty different temperaments, mostly when it comes to like family life, right? And like I said, Hades usually gets the shaft and is labeled as some dark, gloomy, grim reaper. But that's not right. And yeah, they're not perfect, but they keep everything in line here on Earth. Okay, so now moving on to the question for the contest to win the free ohmygods t-shirt. So this is the question. Which sea was the home of the god Poseidon? So if you remember the answer, you can head to ohmygods.ca/contest and submit your correct answer, and then add in your contact info and your t-shirt size. And then if you get picked, you can win a free t-shirt. Alrighty, so for next week, the plan is to go over the ladies of Olympus. We just went over their brothers/husband if you're Hera, /father for a couple of the other gals. But now it's time to really do a deep dive into who they are. Out of the 12 or 14 gods, depending on how you slice it, 5 or 6 of them, but as I said before, this is a pro-Hestia and pro-Hades space, so 6 of the 14 are goddesses who bring a little bit of something to the table, even if there is a little overlap. But there's a little overlap between a bunch of gods. So yeah, this week we talked about Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades a little bit more, but next week will be all about Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, Demeter, Hestia, and Artemis. If you like what you heard, please feel free to follow, subscribe, rate, and all the rest. And if you're looking for any info or deets, check out ohmygods.ca for the reading/watching list, as well as the cheat sheet and the upcoming episodes. Thanks again for listening. Okay, bye!